mostly, it really started when I was at the Massachusetts Audubon Society, where I was a lobbyist, which isn't always a bad thing. And what I want to do is first talk about, I'll kind of take you through a little historical journey of Massachusetts water supply protection. This is really my story. If you ask different people, you're going to get a different story. So you're going to see it through the lens of an environmental advocate. And one of the things that really surprised me when I worked at Audubon, when I first started working there and they wanted me to work on water resources, is we did a little survey in the city of Boston and asked people, where does your drinking water come from? So I'm going to ask you, for those of you who filled up your water bottles, where'd your water come from? You can, there's no, we won't grade you on this. You could be, yeah. Right. Most 75% of the people that we asked, and you might have been thinking this in the back of your minds, Boston Harbor. They thought our drinking water came from Boston Harbor because that's the water that they saw. So they, I'm being ambushed. Hi, Nick. But it does come from Quabbin Reservoir. This is a picture of Quabbin Reservoir. It's out in western Massachusetts. And what we did at Mass Audubon was to try to figure out really how to get a grip on water resource management in the state, because from our view it was running amok. So what I'm going to talk about is partly science and partly political science. And in my view, when you're doing water policy, it's both. You've got science and political science, and we tried to combine those two to make a difference. So I'm going to walk through some slides, and then hopefully I'll get through these and take questions, and then move on to some more modern things going on in California. So anybody know who the Speaker of the House was back in 1977 and 87 who made this quote famous? Hopefully, all politics are local. Generational gap here. Yep. Tip O'Neill, yay! Tipper, all politics are local. So a lot of what I'm going to talk about, oh, I control the slides. This is really about how very few people, local people, can make a huge difference. And these are the three people who were really instrumental in creating the uprising of support that we got statewide for protecting water resources. And they started out in western Massachusetts, which is where Quabbin Reservoir is, and they marched to the State House and then onto Congress. And I'll kind of trace their path, and it was a lot of us that were part of this, but trace their path through how we accomplished something quite amazing. So just some terminology that you'll hear: gallons per day, million gallons per day, GCPD, gallons per capita per day. It's all about how much water we're using. Safe yield, how much water you can withdraw from the source so it's sustainable over time. We're not going to run out of water. And then the governmental agencies that were in charge of water at the time that basically managed the resource: Metropolitan District Commission up until mid-'80s, and then it was taken over by the Mass Water Resources Authority. A lot of people think EPA manages water supply in terms of the amount of water that you can take out of the ground. EPA does not manage how much water you can take out of the ground or out of a reservoir. They do not deal with water quantity at all. It's almost all local. State governments regulate it. The Bureau of Reclamation has reservoirs that they manage, that they regulate theirs, but there's no one federal government agency that says, yeah, you can take that much water. Nobody is in charge of managing the amount of water that's available for supply. So it ends up being very much a local issue. So let's talk about Boston. First public water supply in Boston Common. Kind of everything starts in Boston, doesn't it? I think there was a spring actually on Spring Street in Boston, but then Boston Common Frog Pond was the water supply that basically lasted a couple hundred years. And then it was expanded to go to Jamaica Pond, which is still in Boston. That's over in the Fenway. And then Lake Cochituate, which is out in Framingham, Hopkinton area. Larger reservoir out there. And then Sudbury Reservoir was created 1870. And then Wachusett. If you fly across the state, you'll cross Quabbin and then Wachusett, basically northeast of Worcester. That was a major water supply that was online. That was 40 miles west of Boston. And then what do you think the Metropolitan District Commission proposed next when they started running out of water? Okay, to Quabbin. So this is where the social issues got really interesting. Quabbin Reservoir, huge reservoir, beautiful reservoir, provides a lot of drinking water, created back in 1940, 80 miles west of Boston. Here's the headline, the local headline that appeared. So there were 4 towns that were drowned by the creation of Quabbin Reservoir. It was a dam and Swift River, and the dam filled up, and all 4 towns were evacuated and lost. They're underneath Quabbin Reservoir. There are buildings underneath Quabbin Reservoir. When Quabbin gets low, you can actually see, if the water's nice and clear on a clear day, you can see the buildings. So that created a lot of resentment. We now got an east-west water war going on. And even though that was back in 1940, people don't forget. So what happened over the growth of the MDC system, this is basically the demand curve. You've got millions of gallons per day up, going up, and then across are the years, and you can see the demand. And it kept going up, and you saw these little spikes. Why do you think it went up? There's some obvious reason. Population. Why else would it go up? Agriculture, more outdoor. What people put sprinklers in their yards. Yep. Pardon? Standard of living. Yep, which meant people could afford, you know, more. And the other thing that happened was MDC wasn't just providing water to its existing users. From the environmentalist perspective, they were on an expansion. They wanted to expand. They wanted to expand. Why? People weren't getting water for free. Revenues. We need more revenue. So there were actually towns that they recruited to join their system, even though those towns had their own drinking water supplies. They abandoned them, and they joined the system. And part of the reason was this will give you room to grow even more. You're not going to be limited by your local water supply. Maybe it'll save you money. I don't know what the economic argument was, but certainly it was like, this will give you room to grow. You're not going to be limited by your wells. Shut them down. Join us. So a lot of those spikes you see, part of it was population, but a lot of it was expanding the system. And so in we had a drought of record in the 80s. Okay, so that started a lot of concern. Oop, we might run out of water. Let's project how much we're going to need by 2020, and they did. And they projected 150 million gallons per day more was needed. That's an interesting curve. Kind of alarmed people out in the western part of the state. Where are you going to get that much water? And so, yes, MDC actually proposed, and some of what you're going to see are these old maps from the 80s, best I could find in the archives, but they proposed Northfield, there's Quabbin out there. Oops, I got a clicker here somewhere. There's Quabbin. Okay, this is the Connecticut River Valley here. This is where I grew up, right around here. And so the proposal was to put a new diversion from the Connecticut River. There was already one for hydropower. But let's just connect this pipe and pipe more water into the Quabbin Reservoir from the Connecticut River. Not a problem. We got a lot of water, right? We'll just skim off the flood flows. So that was the proposal. And this is actually what the Connecticut River looks like up there when it's flowing. This is normal flow. Kind of nice. That's what it looks like when the river is diverted. So if you don't, and you see there's not a lot of houses up there. So there aren't a lot of people that appreciate that kind of an impact. But the people who did live up there got pretty up in arms about the whole thing. And there they are again. So we had a biologist, this guy here. Alexander Dawson was one of the first Harvard Law School female Harvard Law School graduates. She's passed away, unfortunately. She was Sierra Club. Roby was with me at the Audubon Society. And then Bill Elliott had a lot of qualifications: large-scale systems engineer, PhD in analytical chemistry, planetary atmospheric science, basically a gadfly. So we had some resources. These were volunteers, but we had some resources, and it kind of all started here. So what was the strategy? Number one, raise awareness and establish a political base. You're not going to do it with 3 people. So we got a problem here. Nobody knows about it. We got to get it out, get the word out. Let's take another look at that demand curve. Do we have a 150 million gallon per day problem? Let's redefine the problem. Question the baseline assumptions and the baseline conditions. Let's look at how much water we're really using today. And then it's not very effective if you're an advocate to just say no. To oppose something isn't all that creative. It's fun. It's not very creative. So we had to develop what the alternative would be. You know, if you do have a problem, let's quantify it and let's figure out another way to solve it, because we don't want it to be our river. So here's a step-by-step process, organizing the political base. Okay, so who else in this river basin might care? We figured we had to do something to get people to care, so we created an entity that we made up. I forget, it's the Committee to Save the Connecticut River or something. We brought it to a printer back in those days. We had an official letterhead. And we put a board of directors column in the left-hand side with the names of all the mayors who had cities on the Connecticut River. And we trotted around, I didn't at the time, Roby did, but they trotted around to city halls and said, you realize there's a proposal to drain the Connecticut River. We'd like you to sign this, be on a board of directors to help us get more information about this impact here. They all signed. Who doesn't want their name on a letterhead? Everybody signed, took 10 minutes, no questions asked. So now we had a political base, and by the way, they never met once. We kept them informed, but they never met. The entity, it was a shadow government. I mean, it was us with their imprimatur behind us. So we got the political base. We started getting some attention by the MDC now because we were writing letters with their names on the letterhead. And so the first thing we did is let's look at that demand curve. Do we really need 457 gallons per day by 2020? And the blue line there is what we came up with. And so we enlisted the support of demographers, and we looked at their population projections. We compared them to other population projections. The demographers have a whole cool science going on. Is it an economically driven projection? I mean, they got all sorts of assumptions going into population projections. That brought it down a little bit. We also looked at what their assumptions were in terms of expanding. Is it a recruitment? Is this a recruitment strategy now, more communities being added, or is it to sustain the communities they already have? And a lot of it was recruitment, so we took that out of the equation. So we came up with our own. This is a whole analysis that went on. But the long and short of it, we said, you do need more water, but you need 70 million gallons. You don't need 150 million gallons. So everybody said, nonsense, you guys are crazy. So we thought we probably needed to get some more information. We asked for an environmental impact report to be done. It was pretty new at the time. The idea there was to expand the analysis to include other rivers, not just the Connecticut. We also wanted to restore abandoned water supplies, put them back online. If they're perfectly good water, put them back online. That's another source. Conserve the water you've got. That's another strategy. Why do you think we asked for other river diversions to be added? These are environmental advocates that don't want to see rivers diverted. Wanted to spread the misery around? Yeah? Yeah, that'd be one reason. Maybe do a comparative analysis. Maybe there's another river where the impacts won't be as bad. That's the scientific answer. What's the politically scientific answer? Yeah, we want to increase our base. We don't want to be out there alone in the Connecticut River Valley. We want everybody to be up in arms about this. So we started looking around. So there's the Merrimack right here. It's a pretty big river. There's an Nashua. It's a pretty big river. Got the Millers involved up here. Basically, we got this voting block. Okay, that we wanted to be realistic. I mean, some people on the committee said, "Oh, let's go to the aquifer down here." We wanted to be, so we wanted to get the pipeline is here. We wanted to make it close enough to be able to tie in. So at least it was feasible. So that's what we did. We got a bunch of other rivers lined up to be part of the environmental impact statement, and a lot more people concerned about it now, and our committee was expanded because other people wanted their representatives from their river basins on the committee. And so we had a new governor coming in, and you know, new governors always like to do new things, right? So Dukakis and Evelyn Murphy was his, I think she actually was the environmental affairs secretary and lieutenant governor at the same time, and she was the first environmental secretary we ever had. So we went into her office and said, gee, we need an environmental impact report. It's not just the Connecticut River. Part of the reason we wanted more rivers is to get it over the environmental impact threshold so we could have a study. And we also came up with this idea. There was a new piece of legislation that allowed the state to fund a citizens advisory committee. I mean, citizens usually don't get funded by the entity they're opposing. Like, here, I'm going to pay you to argue with me. It doesn't usually happen. But with the political support we had, we were created in 1978, the Water Supply Citizens Advisory Committee, WSCAC, better known as WSCAC, first statewide advisory committee. We were funded by the MDC. Money came out of the Metropolitan District Commission. They really didn't like this idea at all. They said, I don't know why you're so worried about us. We never think about you. We said, that's the problem. So $100,000 a year. We had a full-time assistant and the 3 co-chairs. Those 3 faces you saw were each paid $20,000, and we had a little office out in Hadley and a typewriter and got to work. So after creating the committee and getting the alternatives analysis and doing the demand projections that showed you don't need so much water, now we need to mount the case for the alternative. Where can we find that 70 million gallons per day to avoid the river diversion? Well, we started looking at where the water, how the water is being used within the existing system. This shows you how old this is, right? So non-domestic, this is everything but residential. Businesses, industries, houses, households, household use. Now, all this stuff here, it's basically called non-revenue producing water, unaccounted for water. It's lost. It's leaks in the pipes. It's registers that aren't registering water use. It's any number of things. The point is there's 34% of your water is missing. So light bulb went on. Guess what? 34% of your water is equal to 70 million gallons per day. Isn't that a coincidence? Guess what? You don't need more rivers, right? You need to just figure out where your water's going. So here we got big into conservation, use water wisely, improve existing infrastructure, protect what you've got, protect the land that provides ongoing water supply. So does anybody know what this is? So wooden water pipe. Boston had wooden water pipes until maybe 1998. They probably still have them. Wooden water pipes. So that's one problem. And we got leaks going on. Systems, I mean, most of them aren't visible like this. I took this a little bit out of context. Most of them you never see because they're underground. But you have blowouts like this occurring in a system that is not managed. That's a lot of water. And so part of the solution we proposed was leak detection and repair. Find out where your leaks are, get the big ones first, fix them. You're going to save a lot of water that way. And so that's kind of what a leak detection and repair program looks like. 84 miles of the system is MWRA owned, and then there's a lot of them that are community owned. So the towns own their pipes. So a lot of the leaks were going on in the town system. We didn't care. It was all coming from the same source. You got to fix your leaks. So another solution is, the low flow fixtures. We actually changed the plumbing code. I'll never forget going into the Massachusetts Board of Plumbing Code Commissioners. 5 guys smoking cigars. They were just like big guys. And we convinced them to change the plumbing code from, I think it was 7 gallons per flush, 7.5, something like that, to 1.6. It took 2 or 3 meetings. They kind of liked us. They thought we were cute. They thought we were entertaining. And they wanted to be the first state in any country to change the plumbing code. So they went out on a limb for us. I have to give them credit. And then actually that is now the National Plumbing Code. That's the piece of this where we went to Congress. Chet Atkins was our congressman. We did it in Massachusetts. It is now the national, every plumbing code nationwide is now based on what we did for this reason. So that's pretty cool. So the other thing you get into economics, what was happening before was a declining block rate structure, meaning the more water you use, the less you pay. Use a million, your unit price goes down the more water you use. It's a revenue generator, but it's also, doesn't incentivize conservation, quite the opposite. So this is what an increasing block rate structure looks like. And that's what we were advocating. In fact, it should be sharper than this. It should be the more you use. And do most people pay water bills? A lot of towns are going to increasing block rate structure. Summertime, you get charged a lot more for your water. So here's what happened. The end of this, I'll just cut to the chase here. The river diversions, all of them were killed. None of them were identified as feasible economically or otherwise, because we identified an alternative, a bunch of alternatives. And if you look at, this is the actual, so you remember that graph that showed, here's the safe yield going up to 457, remember that? And we said, well, 370, but you can really get it down to safe yield if you just do these simple things. This is where it is now. We were aiming too low. And then here's our old little graph we showed. I mean, people got a little carried away here, but we were very excited about all this as we saw this line sinking and sinking. And a lot of it was the MWRA. Well, the MDC became the MWRA. They gave grants to households to put fixtures in. You know, they did all these things that added up to a hell of a lot of water. So then what happened, we thought we were done. And then there was the Dukakis versus Bush presidential race, and Boston, remember, no, you're all too young. Boston Harbor, this was the major environmental issue of the campaign. George Bush came to Boston, did a tour on the harbor. I was invited and got disinvited. I wonder why. And after that, all of a sudden there was an uproar about we got to do something. Our MDC at the time was underfunded. They can't clean up the harbor. And they can't do a good job with their water either. They'd actually done a pretty good job with their water, but Boston Harbor was a sewer. There's no denying that. It was a mess. So on we went on. What happened was, well, we got to get rid of the MDC. We need a authority that can raise bonds and has more financial autonomy than a government agency like the MDC. And this is happening all over the country. There's a lot of authorities being formed. So we basically tucked into that. There's enabling legislation that changed from MDC to MWRA. You need the legislature to approve this thing. So we tucked a lot of provisions in there on the water supply side to make sure that what we did was going to be institutionalized. So things like, before you, and this was all an anti-expansion agenda, because we were okay with some expansion, but it's not, we want to keep the water sustainable was the major. So these are the principles for any new expansion. First of all, you have to have a safe yield that's sufficient to provide your new demand. Secondly, you're not going to be abandoning drinking water sources that are perfectly fine. In fact, we came up with you can abandon them, but first you got to see if you can treat them. And we came up with a metric, 2.5 times the price of MWRA water. If it's more than that, you could abandon them. If it's less than that, you got to fix them. Some of these things are arbitrary. You have to adopt a water management plan. You have to have a leak detection repair program in place. You can't have a feasible local water supply source, and you got to get the prior approval of the governor and the legislature. So a much higher hurdle to jump over. That we got into the legislation. So when you're on a roll, you're on a roll. We got the legislation adopted in '85, and then we started looking at who's allocating water, how are we making decisions outside of the MWRA. Because MWRA supplies 2.5 million people, so basically metropolitan Boston, but there's a bunch of other drinking water supplies all over the state. So we wanted to, like Ipswich River is one totally overused watershed. I mean, the river runs dry, it has for a long time. It's over-allocated. There were legislative authorizations that were more than the amount of water that could ever be available, So if people, it was paper water, people thought they had the ability to withdraw that much. They didn't. It just didn't exist. So we started working towards requiring permits for withdrawals. We got the Water Management Act passed in '86. We got some conservation requirements in place for these smaller water management allocations, and the goal really was to manage and protect all water supplies to keep water local and to avoid impact of major centralized systems. If you use the water in the same place, if you take the water out of the same watershed, you put it back in, you're maintaining that balance. If you're taking water out of, it's like a bank account. If you take water out and put it somewhere else, you're going to run a deficit. You need that water back in the basin as much as possible to replenish it. So that was the principle behind this. Okay, so, and this is City of Boston. I just wanted to show you this graph that just shows you the city itself. We're back to 1900 million gallons per day water use, back to where we were in 1900. So the city really did its part, for sure. And then the Quabbin Reservoir was not really protected, so we wanted to make sure that there was not development going on in there, and we wanted to avoid the cost of a filtration plant. At the time, there was a big debate over, let's just build treatment plants so we don't have to worry about what we do on the land. And we didn't like that for a couple of reasons. One is you start going down that treatment road, and you just keep building on the chain. It just becomes an endless stream of pollutants that you're treating for constantly. And we also wanted to protect the land. And protect that reservoir for the long run. So we entered into a whole Watershed Protection Act, 1992. It was David Cohen, representative from Newton, that spearheaded that, called the Cohen Bill. So that was a major victory in making sure watersheds were protected. Some of these things, these legislative flurries of activity, they start with one crisis. And then you create a momentum, and then you get a bunch passed because people are used to they get used to the problem, and they're familiar with them, and they see that as the next logical step. Once you don't have legislation passed for a long time, it's hard to get back in there. So we took advantage of that momentum and did a bunch of things. So that's the watershed. The green area is the watershed that's protected out there, and just some shots. That's what it looks like. That's what it looks like when it's full. People enjoying it. We got a bunch of moose out there now, over 100, hopefully not ticks. That's what the system looks like. There's been a lot of improvements made along the way to maintain it, and that's it. So that's the Massachusetts story. I'll take questions, and then if you'd like, and we have time, I can talk a little bit about California. Yep. Oh, okay.
Do you think that the reduction of water use was more attributed to like just fixing the system, or just making people more aware and basically forcing them to use less through raising the prices? I just want to, you know what I mean?
It's a good question. It was more infrastructure.
Like by a large margin? Yeah, really?
It's much harder to change people's behavior. And in fact, Paul Levy, who was director of MWRA at the time, we were making leak detection repair was the first thing we did because it was like leaky. And then we started getting into behavioral changes. And he made a very good point. He said, people, you want it to be seamless for them so that they don't really have to think about it. And so the more you can make it easy, not involve a lot of choices, because even people that are well-intentioned, you know, I mean, really, most people have other things to worry about. But if you can institutionalize it, like make sure, like through the plumbing code then became not just toilets, but fixtures, and then you hand out free devices and things like that. Yeah, most of it was infrastructure, the behavioral stuff. Right now, what I keep saying, I've been out of state government for 10 years. When the rivers drop below a certain level in stressed basins, there's water, what do you call them? Water curtailment. So you'll have towns where you just can't water your lawns, or they go to every other day. So that people are very responsive to, and the reason is that people report their neighbors. So we have the police, the local police patrol. That's the major. I mean, towns don't have to police water use restrictions, outdoor sprinklers. They've had people calling them saying in the middle of the night saying, I hear my neighbor's sprinklers going. They don't think anybody can see it because it's midnight, but I can hear it. No, but people are very, they like to rat other people out. Other questions? Yep.
Have the changes to the Massachusetts use of water and the city of Boston use of water, would you say that that's more of an exceptionalist Massachusetts thing, or has that kind of been going on around the country?
Oh boy, that's a really good question. I ask when I go, I don't have statistics on that. I do not have statistics on that. You probably could Google it and find out. What you would do is find out what's the gallons per capita per day, GCPD average per state. I do know, because I do some work out in California, that they've been bragging about their water. They had water shortage just a few years ago, and Governor Brown said 20%. Our goal is 20% conservation. And I was asking people out there, so what's your average gallons per capita per day use? Because that's what people use. It's personal. And it was way higher than Massachusetts. We're 65 gallons per capita per day, which, think about it. Do you need 65 gallons per person? think about 65 gallons. That's considered low. I mean, California, I think it's around about 100 gallons per day per person, and they thought that was really low. But they've got a lot of outdoor water use going on. Yep, question?
Thank you so much for the wonderful first half of this talk. May I ask you about the role of deindustrialization? Because I know in Rhode Island at the same time period, there's a lot of textile, sort of last remnants of electroplating textiles closing their shops. Is there something similar going on in this area?
Well, the industrial water use actually went down. And in fact, I forgot about this, but Gillette, they make razor blades. Polaroid, there were a couple of companies that we reached out to because they were major water users, and they saw it was in their bottom line. They changed their processes to save water. I think it was Gillette or Polaroid, I forget which one, 90% reduction. And a lot of the heavy water users were moving out, and the high tech was moving in. So the industrial sector probably helped bring that curve down quite a bit. Yeah. Yep.
As someone who didn't grow up in this area, what a wonderful story. I wanted to thank you for sharing it. What's still needed? Like if you were to say, these are the 3 things we still need to do in Massachusetts, Boston, or whatever, what are the things that you would love to get some legislation passed on if you could?
That's really a good question, because I'm wondering what my old counterparts in the environmental movement are doing. I'm like, well, why aren't they doing something? But I mean, what would you do? Well, I think that probably the biggest thing is green infrastructure, because the biggest impact on flow right now, river flow, just the amount of river available in the water for, like you saw those 2 pictures, right, of the Connecticut. I mean, we all like to see rivers flowing and fish, and you can recreate. The main thing is stormwater. So the water that flows down the streets goes into pipes and goes directly out to the river, which means that the rain doesn't have enough time to soak into the ground slowly and then replenish stream flow. It's flashy. It rains and the stream goes up and then it crashes. So basically a natural hydrograph would be a nice, the flow of water would be nice and gentle, and you get some nice recharge year round. You ever noticed if you're in a watershed that isn't developed, it's flowing year round. And like, well, where's this water coming from? It hasn't rained. It's coming from the ground because the ground is being replenished. So I would get green infrastructure in. Does everybody know what green infrastructure is? So instead of the pipes, you basically have water percolating naturally through the ground. One success story that I'll show, I have to because it's Patriot season, right? So when Bob Kraft wanted to build a new stadium, he and Jonathan, I was in state government at the time, they came into our office, I'll never forget it, and said, we want to build a new stadium and we need it to be built for the next season, and you know how important football is around here. What do we need to do? And it was the best question I've ever had a developer ask. Those guys are smart. He's a Tufts grad too, right? Bob Kraft? Tufts? Huh? Okay, close enough. So we said, well, here's what so we gave them a bunch of environmental requirements, and one of them was they were on the headwaters of the Neponset River, half a mile ahead and piped, that used to have really nice fish runs and wildlife and everything. We said, get that pipe out of the ground and create the river. And they did. So if you go to Patriot Stadium now, you'll see that there's a parking lot there, and there's a natural river right along the parking lot. So that's just an example. What they did so helped the Neponset River downstream. So not everybody has the money to pull pipes out of the ground and put back the river, but what you can do is redirect stormwater into filtration areas, into rain gardens, swales, bioswales, create wetlands. That's the main thing I would do, is just figure out how to get more green infrastructure. That was a long answer. Okay, yep.
Hi, could you take charge of stopping all the natural gas leaks?
Well, you know, it's interesting. The whole Kinder Morgan proposal to build a gas pipeline across Massachusetts, part of the opposition was, you know, you got a lot of gas leaking right now, and they used the example of what we did with water for gas. I'm not involved in that, but I know there's a lot of analogies between what we did in water and what we did, what should be done with gas. I know that the Environmental Defense Fund has done a study. They basically had probes around seeing how much methane Methane is a major greenhouse gas pollutant, and it's coming out of the pipeline. So they did a study showing massive leaks. At the same time, this is like, you know, deja vu all over again. At the same time, they want to bring more gas in. It's leaking. So I have talked to the folks that are working on the pipeline, stop the pipeline, but Kinder Morgan is dead. But they always come back. I mean, it's just a pipeline every few years they want another pipeline. But do you have any suggestions? Are you involved in this?
Well, I would hope that the same tactics you use would do a lot of good.
Yeah. Okay. Do you want me to talk a little bit about California? Okay. This is going to be much shorter because I'm much newer at it. Oh, I better not touch this or it'll get messed up. So while we're segueing into California, so after I left Mass Department of Environmental Protection about 10 years ago, I went into consulting and never really spent much time in California. California has all different water rights. So here we regulate water withdrawal because it's it's basically a public resource. Out west, it's, you know, you're first there, you own it. So water rights are a much bigger, it's privately held water rights out there. But what we worked on was forecast-informed reservoir operations, so we're getting a little bit more technologically advanced. This is really, there's some analogies here, because this is kind of a committee structure that was created to really think about a different way of managing water in California from reservoirs. And in this case, it was the Army Corps of Engineers we were trying to get to change the way they thought about water. So before it was Metropolitan District Commission, now it's the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. And this is part of a presentation I borrowed from the guys I'm working with out there. So the focus, this is not a bad place to go if you have to work and go to California. This is Lake Mendocino. This is the Russian River Basin. This is Sonoma County, lots of wine, really good wine. So it's a tiny little reservoir actually up there in the upper end of the Russian River, owned by the Army Corps of Engineers, and it's managed for water supply by the Sonoma County Water Agency, very sophisticated drinking water water management group. So the background on this, and I've only got like 15 slides or so, the background on this is the Army Corps of Engineers has their engineers. I'm an engineer too, but not with a capital E. They like formulas. So they're very formulaic, changing their ways now. But so they have what they call a water control manual for every reservoir that they manage. And what they have is this thing called a rule curve that they decide we should not let the water ever get above this line because otherwise we're going to risk flood. So they want the water to always stay down here. And they determined these elevations back in 1950s based on old methods, old forecasts. I mean, at that point, you know, maybe you were lucky to get a 24-hour forecast. They didn't want to be responsible for flooding. So they were risk averse and super conservative. And I respect that. I mean, we don't want people getting flooded. We don't want lives lost. But they took this mission super seriously and were very formulaic about it. So it's a seasonally varying pool. You see, depending on the time of year, the water supply pool changes. And at that point in history, the replenishment, a lot of it depended on a diversion, which was then stopped. And when that diversion stopped, there was less water replenishing this reservoir, and they didn't change this rule curve. They kept at it. So back in the, what did I show you? Oh, shoot, I'm missing a nice slide in there. So what happened there was a shortage of water back in 2012, and what happened was we had a storm that came in and pushed the water level up above this curve, and they dumped it in anticipation of that flood coming. There was a rainstorm coming, and it was creeping up around here. It popped up there. They dumped it. Another one came in, dumped it. Third one came in, they got really scared, they dumped it like down to there. Even though, this is 2012, even though at the time the forecasters, the meteorologists were saying, we're only going to get 3, and after that we got a long haul before you're going to see any more rain. Because they were tracking atmospheric rivers, which I'll show you in a bit. So the science had changed a lot, but this is what their rule curve said, and my God, they weren't letting that water above the rule curve, so they were still relying on that line. So this is, I'm going to skip over this, that's the background. So what happened was that summer and the 2 years after that, when the water supply was not replenished, there were major shortages. So this is Mendocino County, grape country, wine crop suffered. They were not able to take as much, they didn't have as much water. So there was a major loss of wine crop up there, which is a huge economic impact. And so everybody knew that that water didn't have to be managed that way. There were more modern ways to manage it. So let's get together and form what's called a forecast-informed reservoir operation. So let's use a forecast to inform how you operate the reservoir. Let's not just use that rule curve without getting the benefit of new technology and science. So what would get out of that is improved water supply reliability. We also needed to make sure that what we came up with did not increase flood risk, because that's what the Army Corps cared about. So we needed to say, how can you manage it differently by increasing and increase water supply reliability, not increase flood risk, and let's not need to build another reservoir, because that was being talked about at the time. Oh, we ran out of water. We're going to need another reservoir. Well, maybe you just need to manage it differently. So we created another steering committee, and here's the logos, and here's our committee. This wasn't actually my idea. Great minds think alike a lot. But we have, guess who's on our committee? Army Corps of Engineers. Not one, not two, but three. We got 3 guys from the Army Corps. And they were hostile when they first joined, but they became friends. And we got Bureau of Reclamation, because they manage reservoirs. We wanted to hear from them. And GS, U.S. Geological Survey, they know all about water. NOAA. We got the people who needed to be there in the room. And we made it fun, because everybody met in Sonoma County and wine country, and so we got to do a lot of tours. And we got to meet down at Scripps Institution of Oceanography, which is La Jolla. That's our first meeting, I think, July 2012. That's the group. And we basically, nobody got paid to do this. It was, let's form a committee, let's work together, let's see if we can change the way reservoirs are managed. If we can do it in Lake Mendocino, maybe it'll be a model for the rest of California. That was pretty attractive, and we'd just gone through another crisis. So that's another kind of common denominator. A crisis creates opportunity. Don't let one go by. When Lake Mendocino ran dry, and the grape crops were ruined, that was an opportunity to say, this is when we got to get in there and try to change it. So we did a work plan a year later. Everybody, this was a mess. We called it a pile of lumber, because everybody on that committee drafted a section, and then I was tagged with trying to put it together. It was a mess. So we huddled up at Sonoma County office for about a week, and we pulled it together. And that's our work plan, and it has everybody's name on the front. Isn't that nice? And we actually had it published, so it was a very good scientific document as well. But that was our work plan. And then we kind of created a process flow, if this, then that, which was a central part of our, it's like a decision support tool that we created. That was a big part of it. And then the next year we put together a preliminary viability assessment. So we did a bunch of modeling and analyses to show if we managed that reservoir differently by using forecast information, what difference would it make? Would it make any difference at all? Would it increase water supply reliability? Would it increase flood risk? What would the difference be? So this preliminary viability assessment, there were 3 major pieces. Sonoma County did a lot of the reservoir modeling. HEC, that's the group in the Army Corps of Engineers. They did an analysis as well, because they were concerned about flooding. So they ran their own HEC model to see if it would increase flooding. And we actually had 2 models. We were debating which model to run, and they decided to run them both and see if we get different answers. So we had, parallel models going. And then the Center for Western Weather and Water Extremes, those are the guys at Scripps, they did the scientific forecast information. So what the results are that these are existing conditions, this low blue line, and this shows how much storage would be available in the reservoir, comparing the different operational scenarios. So business as usual, you're going to have about this much water left at the end of your water year, as opposed to the upper blue line, which was the best we could do, It's quite a significant, this difference is quite significant. And then we had some scenarios in between. When you're in California and water costs a lot of money, 1,000 acre-feet is a lot of money. You know, you're talking millions of dollars. It doesn't look like much difference on a graph, but when those water supply guys are in the room, you can just, this is major revenue for them. And if they don't have the water, it's also a major economic loss. So this is the result of the model that the Heck group ran, showing is it going to increase flood risk. So this is the flood risk curve, and all of the different models were running. Isn't that nice? No increase in flood risk. This was kind of a surprise. Everybody thought there'd be some significant. There is no statistically, they're right there. So that showed you could increase water supply reliability without increasing flood risk. We did some more analyses showing what's the time of travel. If you're going to let water out of the reservoir, it's got to get beyond the major flooding points to make sure it's safe. So we did a whole, I didn't do much of this, the guys at Scripps did, but calculated time of travel to make sure we knew exactly how long we had before the decision had to be made to whether to hold back the water or let it go. That was very important. And then here's where we get into, this is I think the only atmospheric river slide. You may have heard Pineapple Express. It's basically concentrated, it's like a conveyor belt of water vapor that rockets across the Pacific. It starts in the Indian Ocean, and you'll see it forming, and it gets to be a very narrow band, and it just dumps water. And there's ways to measure the water vapor content, even when it's way out here, and models that project where it's going to hit, how much it's going to hit. That's what we're using to get the reservoir better managed. And the certainty is getting much better. And there are actually planes that go up and throw drop bombs through the air and get actual measurements. And we're getting more and more and more precise about predicting the impact of these atmospheric rivers. And this kind of shows what the difference in the impact could be from an atmospheric river, which is a lot. And those have never been taken into account in managing reservoirs. So the path forward, I'm going to kind of skip that. Path forward is where we actually, today, the Army Corps of Engineers just approved the request for a major deviation from the Water Control Manual. Just got the email today. So we submitted that viability assessment, and we said, we think we can vary your rule curve using this information, and the answer was yes. So what we plan to do over the next 3 years, the way the Army Corps works is if you get a deviation approved 3 years in a row, it automatically triggers an update to their water manual. So that's what we're doing. And they're with us. And so right now, it's kind of a popular thing. Everybody wants to do Thero. So Sacramento's looking at it. We're actually working now in Los Angeles County, Prado Reservoir, Orange County, 2.5 million people. It's huge. And their water rates are sky high. And so we're looking at it. There are different set of issues. There's a bird population that prevents the water level from going too high. It's an endangered vireo. So interesting, instead of fish, which is an issue in Mendocino, it's actually an endangered bird. So you've always got the balance, water supply, flood reliability, flood risk, and I didn't even talk about the fisheries, but there's always biological issues that you have to deal with. And then Portland, Oregon, and a bunch of others are interested in this. So that's California.
Thank you very much for showing that you can actually make a difference with your job. So I would like to kick us off by asking, what kind of technical skills should people try to get before they leave college in order to be in the field of sustainable water management?
Well, it depends on what angle you want to do. If you want to do modeling, then engineering would help. It's really interdisciplinary, and that's what makes the team work. We have meteorologists, we have hydrologists, we have engineers, biologists. So I think you could come in with anything. I'm not using I understand this well enough to get by, but I'm not using engineering skills. I basically do organizational strategic management and facilitation. That's really my role, is I try to keep this group together and focused and translate some of the scientific stuff into English. So I don't think it really matters. I think it always helps to have a little bit more of a technical background when you're starting out. Employers like to see that. But even GIS, you know, data management skills, you can get in any way you want and then grow from there. So I wouldn't, if you're a psych major, perfect.
Other questions?
Yep.
It's a little bit random, but I was curious, like, as solar panels start getting implemented more and more throughout, like, states like California and Massachusetts, will that affect water flooding and water permeability? Because it'll cause a little more runoff, wouldn't it? Or no?
Solar panels on roofs?
On, like, land. Like, I see a lot of solar panels next to
panels.
Highways or
yeah,
on
those
landfills.
Yeah, those are, I don't know why they're doing that. It just seems like there's so much bare rooftops that could take the panels. Yeah, I think that would, yes, you could make an argument that that's going to increase runoff because it's more impervious surface, but I don't think it's going to be significant, you know, unless they get crazy with those land-based panels. I think the bigger issue is especially in Massachusetts, where we've already developed, I mean, this is a very heavily developed state. Trying to re-engineer the way we're managing water now is probably going to have a much bigger impact than solar panels. And you could argue, you know, there's a trade-off there. You know, you're gonna save energy and reduce greenhouse gas, and maybe you're going to increase runoff a little bit. Is it significant enough based on the benefits you'll get from it? Probably not. I mean, personally, I think those land-based panels are ridiculous. But because there's, like I say, there's so much rooftop area that can support them that isn't being used. Other questions?
I have another question from the Massachusetts part. I moved to a town last year that has flat rate water metering, and I was pretty shocked. And I was wondering if you had any idea of how prevalent that is.
Flat rate structure?
Yeah.
It's pretty prevalent. And we only banned inclining block rate. And some towns have gone to, I mean, declining. We banned declining block rate, but a lot of towns do flat rate. I don't know what the statistics are, but it's very common not to do inclining.
That's crazy.
Yeah. It's hard to change mindsets because it's like we need water revenue. So if you're using more water, we get more money, rather than thinking about sustainability overall. And you can charge more money for water, but you shouldn't be giving people a break for wasting it. Right. So but every town is different in the way they handle it, and maybe they got a lot of opposition calling it a tax because they were increasing the water rate. Who knows? Yep.
So I just moved here pretty recently, but I have heard a lot on NPR and a few other places about a kind of a crisis of aging water infrastructure. And so I'm wondering, is Boston the exception to that and nationwide? And how do you view that in the long term?
Yeah, I think they are, because of a lot of the improvements that have been made, both on the sewer side and the water side. I mean, it's something you have to stay on top of, and there's a concept called asset management, where you put your revenues back into a revolving fund, so you can make sure that the revenue. So a lot of times you could collect sewer and water rates, and it goes into the general fund. You know, helps offset the tax base. But if you're managing a good system, you put your water and sewer fund back into the fund to maintain it. So that, and then you have it on you have a plan for replacing things every 20 years, so you have a plan. That's fairly new. A lot of places you put it in and you waited for it to deteriorate, and then, whoa, we need a lot of money. But since the MWRA took over, they've been really on top of things here. Some of the older cities where they haven't had a reason to change like this, they're in trouble.
Have any of them started coming to talk to how?
Oh, I'm sure they have. Yeah. Yeah, it started, it's probably more now because I've been out of it for a while. But yeah, there's a lot of exchange, and there's a lot of water associations from around the country, and they all compare notes. So there's a good amount of information exchange. Okay.
Okay, well, let's thank our speaker one more time.
Okay, thank you.
And also, if I can ask everybody a favor and take one chair back, that would be really helpful for us. Thank you.